So just a bit of an embarrassing story into the whole process. I had the word intro written down below the title of the script for like 3 days before I actually finished up the rest of the script, and now I'm just sitting here about to record, and not about to record, I'm literally recording right now, and I just now realized I haven't written an intro. This isn't a bit, I actually didn't do this, like I just forgot. So, Blades of Stone, traded in using the Wild Boar Remembrance. Okay, so the charged variant has a really unique feature that sets it apart from its normal cast, which is that it spawns 3 groupings of projectiles instead of just 1. I replaced all the invisible bullets with glintstone pebbles here so we can get a better view of its trajectory and behavior. And it looks like unless the enemy is close enough for the initial bullet to actually connect, it has a fixed distance that it will travel no matter what. The initial bullet also has a decent amount of tracking to it, but that tracking stops once all the secondary bullets are fired into the ground, which then creates the blast zone of the actual spell. The charged variant chains into 3 separate groupings that fire on a delay after the blast zone before it has already been defined. And at a glance, it seems to just travel in a straight line, but each new bullet spawned after the cluster of stones before it has detonated also has its own tracking and velocity. Sadly, the distance said bullets can actually travel isn't anything more than like a couple feet, meaning an enemy who's full tilt sprinting at you can easily outrun the tracking of the second and third cluster. I feel like this gives the sorcery a very particular strength against hyper-aggressive enemies like the Circblade Dancers. With a little help from Bullgoat Talisman or Leaden Hard Tier, you can easily time a charged cast to where it fires right as the enemy is pretty much in front of you, leading to them hopefully getting hit with all 3 counts of damage. If you're against a boss that has to walk towards you for 10 seconds before actually doing anything remotely dangerous like Mog or Radagon, spamming charged casts at them is a great way to immediately break poise and hopefully deal several thousand damage in the process. You can also hug the corners of walls and other map geometry like in the Godskin duo fight to obscure projectile spam. It's got a learning curve to it, but it hits way too hard to be ignored, and it's one of the game's only worthwhile sorceries that actually take up multiple slots and feel worth it. Cherishing Fingers. Complete Count Emir's entire goddamn questline, boss fight and all. Seriously, that item description ain't no joke. You can deflect anything with this shit. I wish they would have given us this a little earlier than completing an entire questline we aren't even expected to find until we knocked out Mesmer, but I also understand why. Having this utility in your back pocket would have made Rellana into such a pushover that any appearance of her in the story trailer would have had to have been trimmed out due to sheer embarrassment. Sorceries in the Finger class tend to inflict magic damage pretty consistently, so learning that this actually inflicted physical damage was a surprise. The second surprise was seeing that the discrepancy between charged and uncharged was almost 100 points of damage. The third surprise was a distinct absence of hyper armor I noticed while my brains became a fresh coat of paint for Midra's living room wall. Specifically regarding its deflection utility, I was able to consistently smack away whatever spam sandwich was being thrown my way, so long as I started casting it the instant I saw a specific animation. The window of deflection is usually long enough to muscle through a solid second of spam no matter what it is. For damage purposes, the spell is best used in tandem with other stagger-heavy sorceries that hold the target in place and keep it from being too aggressive. Gravity sorceries tend to be pretty good at this, so fire off a grav missile and time a charged cast with when the missile pulls in enemies. Use poise-boosting items like Iron Jar, Bullgoat Talisman, or Leaden Hard Tier can also make up for the hyper armor deficit. Fleeting Microcosm, purchased from Count Emir after ringing the second finger bell. Looking to aim this at an enemy aware of your presence and is currently marching towards you at any speed faster than a slinky somersaulting down the stairs? Don't. Instead, just point the camera straight down and fire your cosmic load straight into the fucking floor. Don't even bother using this at range, not when Gravitational Missile exists. Curiously enough, Fleeting Microcosm actually outpaces the Grav Missile by around 30 points of damage with a regular cast, and around 50 if charged, provided both hits connect. I think what lends the Grav Missile sorcery to be so widely preferred is the difference in its hit radius. 4.5 Miyazaki's is the largest radius a Microcosm will ever become, while the Grav Missile not only detonates with a radius of 6, but also contains an effect that draws enemies into its center, leading to the final hit connecting much more frequently. The Microcosm demands 26 FP versus the Grav Missile's 18, but also has a noticeably shorter fuse and can deal its full damage quicker in a pinch. Another advantage of the Microcosm can be found in its pre-detonation phase, where the initial burst of damage has a stagger value of 3 versus the Grav Missile's 2. This is something you tend to notice on flinching animations of medium-sized enemies, but the stagger value being what it is on the Microcosm sorcery means it can true combo small to medium-sized enemies that get staggered by the first hit. I still think the Grav Missile is overall the better option for things like utility and FP efficiency, but the choice between the two in certain situations may not be as clear as people think. Glintblade Trio. From the Castle Insis checkpoint, Grace, head straight ahead like it's your first time here and just play through the area like normal. When you get to the Iron Gate, go through it and then immediately turn left off the ledge. Climb up some ladders and then drop down from the north end of the roof and it'll be waiting for you right there. Glintblade Trio is the poor, misunderstood bastard father of its forever preferred son, the magic Glintblade. When comparing the charge casts, Trio can barely achieve just a sliver of damage more than its single projectile counterpart, and the damage gets even worse when comparing the regular cast, where Trio usually falls a little more than 10% below the single Glintblade. And I think most of us know by now that the simple big PP damage number means bigger worth and small PP number means less efficiency, and therefore trash logic is sometimes a disingenuous comparison that can get pretty rickety once you start looking at multi-hit spells. Each blade of the Trio, when charged, inflicts 6 poise damage. That is 18 if all 3 connect versus the 10 you get out of the single Glintblade. The total amount becomes 12 when casting normally. The poise munching potential of the Trio sorcery versus the single sorcery should be pretty obvious from there, but multi-hit sorceries are also wonderful for activating other effects like the winged sword buffs or the HP regen from Godskin Swaddling Cloth. The stamina damage on the Trio surges pretty far ahead of Magic Glintblade as well, dealing 111 total stamina damage with a charge cast if all 3 connect, making it an ideal choice against Black Steel Knights and other cowards who hide behind big shields. Something I also found out was the Trio variant, along with the 2 Nail sorceries we're about to look at here in a second, can track enemies regardless of whether or not you're locked onto something, which I think is really convenient. Glintstone Nail. Purchased from Count Emir after ringing the first finger bell. The damage per nail is 196 uncharged and 239 charged, placing it comfortably between Glintstone Pebble and GGS, while also having significantly higher range and better tracking than either. Maternal Staff or not, this is your new go-to straightforward single-use magic Glock. The tracking on this at point blank is obviously nuts, but its ability to split 5 separate times before ending means casting this at point blank range while locked on allows it the potential to hit the target from behind if you miss, provided it can loop back around successfully, and if Miyazaki substituted said target's brains with weak old mashed potatoes. At 10 FP, it's really hard to find a sorcery that could ever replace it. I guess my only worthwhile tip here is to just not rely only on the Maternal Staff's finger sorcery boost. With 80 intelligence and arcane, the Maternal Staff climbs into the 400s, breaking even with Lusat Staff provided all your stats are 80, but it's still much more high maintenance than most other staves because it needs a solid investment into both intelligence and arcane. This is ultimately why the Maternal Staff still might lose to another option you're more properly built for, like the CRS, even with the 15% boost. Glintstone Nails. Purchased from Count Emir after ringing the first finger bell. 71 magic damage per bullet is actually on the stronger end of the scale when it comes to multi-hitters like this, especially considering you're spawning 6. The multi-hit variant may seem unappealing due to its lacking FP efficiency. It can hit for around 40% more damage than the single nail, charged or not, but the asking price of 23 FP raises a bit of concern regarding how it compares with the 10 FP single shot version. Well, feel free to jettison that concern out the nearest garbage chute along with the last 2 weeks of Wendy's you've let rot in the corner of your apartment, because the true discrepancy between the single and multi-nail lies not in its upfront damage, but in its poise damage, especially when charged. The single nail inflicts 5 poise damage when fully charged, which isn't a big deal. It's barely worth getting out of bed for. An omen could sneeze on you and make a bigger difference. The multi-hit sorcery, however, when charged, hits for 4 poise damage per projectile, multiplied by 6 projectiles. You can be busting kneecaps almost 5 times faster than you would with the single nail sorcery. Take into account how exhausting it is to keep up with dragons in the DLC, and that multi-hit poise damage at range starts to look pretty effective. If you're a brainlet mage that wants to get good DPS out of an FP bar so small you could sew clothes with it, go for the single shot. If you yearn to exercise dominion over colossal foes by shattering their ankles with a pneumatic hammer, go for the multi-shot. Gravitational Missile. Defeat the falling star beast just left of the Hinterlands Bridge. Is that fuse too long for your hamster-sized attention span? Playing too much Wuthering Waves and feel lost and alone without a big number proudly presenting itself in bold text in front of your fucking face? Just throw it into a wall. Throw it into the floor. Throw it up somebody's ass. Any tangible physical object doesn't matter, it'll explode immediately and give you the full damage against anything within 6 Miyazakis of your ugly Nexus preset face. This is a rare instance where we've been given a sorcery that can either function as a straightforward damage bullet or a lingering AoE with some crowd control utility, depending on how you cast it. They actually managed to make a forward-firing boring projectile sorcery that didn't bore my ass into Alt F4ing everything after I was done capturing footage. The poise damage is actually the same, both charged and uncharged, so if you're running a poise break build with the sorcery, just don't ever bother charging it. It's that simple. It's 3 points for the pulse burst and then 10 points for the final detonation, no matter what. It does flinch enemies pretty reliably, so you can fling this out to keep something from being too aggressive and then rush in with a close quarters sorcery like Shatter Earth or Gavel of Hema. Just think of it as a nice, convenient curtain of protection that allows you to pull off some riskier casts you normally wouldn't go for. 18 FP is honestly underpriced for the utility it gives you. It combos wonderfully into other gravity sorceries like Blades of Stone and Collapsing Stars, and after using them interchangeably for more than a few minutes, it starts to feel pretty obvious which sorcery subclass got thrown the most favors in the DLC. Impenetrable Thorns. From the Dark Chamber entrance grace, right before you fight Mesmer, head back out the entryway until you see some stairs on your right, drop down where the bat enemy is, and it'll be right behind you. Deals magic damage and bleed status. Wow, fuck, what a combo. Okay, so let's go into why this mulches everything the way it does, because I found some fuckery going on in the parameters that I think needs to be addressed. I tried really hard to convince myself that the mechanics of the sorcery itself were just bugged and maybe an intern just added an extra 0 where there shouldn't have been, like just a harmless mistake. But everything looks way too intentional for that to be the case. The magic damage looks normal enough, sure, but the hit duration being 1/10 of a second is where the concern started to build a little, and upon examining the bleed effect tied to the 2 bullets at the end of the chain and seeing the number 72, I just started getting mad. I don't want to bore people too much with the math of how everything works. I think we've had enough of that lately. But the hit bullet has a lifespan of 0.3 seconds, giving it 3 separate opportunities to apply 72 bleed buildup during its lifespan. This allows it to connect up to 9 separate times on a single target, provided you're practically right next to said target. This results in 648 bleed buildup instantly being inflicted per cast, and 1125 magic damage before defense calculation. And it gets boosted for 18% by the Alberic set. If it doesn't bleed, the magic damage will kill it. If it's strong versus magic, the bleed proc will take care of it. I'm sorry, what tips do you need for this again? Just face a direction and start blasting. You'll be fine, I promise. I two-shotted Radahn's first phase by complete accident. I was just trying to demo the spell. I wasn't even building around it. Not one person in the office saw this damage number and decided to speak out and say, hey guys, how about we calm the fuck down a little bit? It's getting late. Let's all just go home and revisit this tomorrow. Mantle of Thorns. Kill the tree spirit in the sunken chapel. Figure it out. I'm not telling you where it is. It's pointless. Don't look for it. Shit's stupid. 87 base physical damage and doesn't inflict any bleed buildup, unlike its impenetrable bigger brother. If I were the Joker who had the bright idea of relegating the already underwhelming utility of the Briar armor to a sorcery slot and somehow making it functionally worse, I would be paying someone blackmail money for that information to just never go public. You couldn't brazen bull that shit out of me. There's not a single redemptive quirk or quality I can find anywhere remotely close to this sorcery. The very concept of redemption doesn't even want to be seen within the same zip code as whatever this is. The only friend this sorcery will ever be capable of making is the Briar armor set. Just 2 antisocial dudes chilling out underneath a bridge at 3 a.m. because no one else wants to talk to them. I don't even care if they technically stack. Okay, so what? Fucking use something else. That's the tip. Mass of Putrescence. Starting from the Fissure Depths Grace, head northwest until you reach this drop-off point here, then continue onward until you see the sorcery chilling out to your left. I feel a bit mean trying to offer a tip for this one because I've had very little positive experiences with this sorcery, and not even for a valid reason. I'm not exactly sure how to prove this, but something about this spell just does not function as intended. It shares an animation with Cannon of Hema, but in practice resembles the Roiling Magma sorcery a bit more since the Ghost Flame spread isn't triggered upon hitting an enemy with the main projectile, except sometimes it is, but even then it still doesn't feel like it spreads the way it should. The spread is obviously larger when charged up, but it feels really dodgy and just inconsistent. The initial bullet literally goes through enemies, which throws off the entire location of the spread anyways. The short delay probably has some roll catch potential to it if you're looking for a PvP tip, but 41 FP is still way too big of an ask for a sorcery I'm pretty sure is going to get changed in the next patch or two anyways. Miriam's Vanishing. Purchase this from Countamir. I think most people will gravitate towards this being a PvP utility, but I actually think this sorcery has some equally strong, if not stronger, single-player benefits you can mess around with. You can use this to easily avoid meteor attacks from the likes of Estelle and Radahn. Gaius's charge attack becomes extremely easy to space out, and it has wonderful synergy with so many different point-blank close-quarter sorceries like Grav Missile, Shatter Earth, Gavel, any of the Carian sword sorceries, or the Glintblade sorceries. You can cast a failing spell and have it ready, and then abruptly close distance using Miriam's Vanishing. The glint blades will give you a short window of cover to start casting something else. Radagon's icon squeezes even more performance out of this sorcery to the point where it might as well just be Bloodhound Step on a staff. It's more than just another dodge once you get past its deceptively boring concept, but I also feel like being boring is the whole point of the spell. Like, you don't reappear with fireworks blowing out your ass cheeks or anything. Spectacle is pretty obviously not the focus here. It's a simple relocation spell designed to make casting other spells easier and less risky, and honestly, it's really good at doing that, so I have no complaints here. Just get creative with your combos. Rellana's Twin Moons, traded in using Rellana's Remembrance. I like this one for NPC enemies and invaders just because getting knocked out of it doesn't completely prevent the sorcery from casting. The third shockwave, unfortunately the most punishing part of the spell, won't trigger, but your balls still drop on the fragile heads of your enemies, usually dealing around a couple thousand magic damage. Yet another spell that combos exceedingly well with Grav Missile due to its ability to keep enemies in place and prevent something from shoving its sword too far up your ass in a critical moment. But if you're looking to go in dry without the help of any curtains of protection, whatever you're planning to drop this on had better be facing the exact opposite direction with a blindfold and AirPods at max volume. Otherwise, something will knock you out of it, guaranteed. The vertical displacement of the sorcery hangs you in the air for a couple seconds, so any tip you've heard me say over the years involving moon spells being a great way to counter ground crawling attacks will also apply here. Being a full moon spell also means it gets boosted by the CRS, so don't forget that. Rings of Spectral Light. From the Charo's hidden grave grace, head directly east until you cross the pond, and then pivot north and follow the upward slope all the way to a statue with some grave birds surrounding it. The spell will be on that statue. It's not bad. I'm not exactly thrilled to say it exists either. I had some pretty good results throwing this around with ADR and other Ghost Flame themed tools and weapons, and even though the Frostbite buildup by itself is almost never going to be enough for a competent status build, using it alongside other sorceries like Ranni's Dark Moon or weapons like Death's Poker or the Dark Moon Greatsword can help it out pretty tremendously. This sorcery never feels like the linchpin in any build, but rather an extra means of keeping whoever you're aiming at busy while you charge up something a bit more significant. 15 frostbite per bullet is far from impressive, and honestly neither is 50 magic damage, especially when its only would-be saving grace, the damage boost from the Prince of Death staff, doesn't even get applied. If you're facing a boss like Sinisax or other large bosses that don't really move around with any sense of noticeable urgency, you can basically get away with just firing multiple full salvos into its face with very little consequence. Enemies with a tendency to dodge will attempt to evade the windup of the sorcery, lining them up perfectly to eat most of the actual barrage. It's really great when it comes to actually connecting with targets, but you should never run this sorcery as a main source of damage or status. It's a pressure spell that keeps targets busy and prevents frostbite status from decaying by any significant amount if something is out of your effective range. Vortex of Putrescence. God fucking damn it. Putrid Vortex. That's its new name. Putrid Vortex. Traded in using the Putrescent Knight Remembrance. Man, I'm pissed. I wrote 2 whole paragraphs about how this sorcery could technically hit twice on bigger enemies if you properly spaced out the initial ring of bullets or something. I have no idea what extenuating cosmic force planted that idea in my head, but I tried to replicate this multiple times in various clips of footage, and it just never happened again. So that was either a complete lie, or it doesn't happen nearly as consistently enough for it to be a valid piece of advice. Firstly, most people unfortunately acquire this sorcery very late into the DLC, which leaves very limited opportunities for the spell to actually stand out in a fresh run. Instead, just break Miquella's Great Rune by standing in front of Shadowkeep and then leg it straight to the Fissure. I also don't want to complain too much about the hefty int faith requirements, because this being a post-game environment that's so far into the game already takes care of most of those issues anyways, but demanding 2 spell slots makes the 29 FP cost seem incredibly low for some reason, and it's absolutely not. 29 FP to cast anything is a moderately difficult sell already, but it does have some small advantages that I think feel really comfortable on a spell sword build. The cast animation is surprisingly quick, the delay on the subsequent Ghost Flame can flinch smaller enemies, allowing it to be comboed up pretty efficiently with a melee range sorcery. 100 Frostbite is also no small amount, and I think you'll get the most utility out of this if you use it in conjunction with other frost sorceries like Moonblade and Ice Storm. If you stack the sorceries properly, you can proc an effect pretty damn quick, even on big enemies with higher frost resistance. Is it worth 2 spell slots and 29 FP? Jury's still kind of out on that one. Honestly, I'm kind of just hoping some weird tech gets found out months down the road where someone figures out how to get this sorcery to double hit so I can prove to everyone I wasn't succumbing to my weekly lunacy.